Excellent. All right. Well, yeah. Let's go ahead and get it kicked off. I'm Zan from the Israel Trade Office in San Francisco, and we'll go ahead and jump to the agenda slide, and I'll give you a quick run through of what we have on the call today. All right. So we got four main sections. It should the main presentation, being 45, 50 minutes, and we should finish up in about an hour. The call is being recorded, for your convenience and review, so we'll make sure to send out the link to the recording afterwards. I'll go ahead and just take you through a little bit about our organization, and then Jim from CSSi and Ben from the Innosphere will give an overview of a nice program actually they have to continue the topics on this this whole series of free webinars. If you wanted to go more in depth on the topics, they'll talk a little bit about the program for that, and then we'll get into Joe's presentation. So I'll start with a quick overview on us. I will get the next slide up if you can. Excellent. So we are the Israel Economic Mission to the West Coast. We've got an East Coast. We've got other coasts, one of 45 offices around the world, working with the Israeli Ministry of Economy, direct government effort to connect Israeli companies to the local markets abroad. And so at our office in San Francisco, we cover every industry vertical, from cybersecurity to automotive, helping companies enter the U.S. market. And so I focus mostly on healthcare, and that's this large series here is helping healthcare companies find the resources that they need to really enter the U.S. market. And so we do focus pretty aggressively, I guess, on kind of early to growth stage investments, strategic partnerships with corporates, or from hospitals to insurance payers, if we're talking in the medical realm. And so I think a part of this is that our office offers a lot of direct connections to these entities, which I guess these days is a lot of virtual. Used to be more in-person events and trade shows. But really important about this is the kind of strategy behind it, and making sure that you all have the kind of preparation that you need to be successful when Israeli companies are connected to the U.S. entities. From rules and regulations, I think Jim can go over some of the benefits, kind of FDA focused accelerator, but everything from regulations to how to pitch to investors, we really want to help out with. So I'll actually pass to Jim now to talk a little bit about the CSSi program.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zan. It's a pleasure to welcome you here with Zan as well as the Innosphere Ventures. CSSi Lifesciences, in collaboration with the Israeli Trade Mission and Innosphere Ventures, has established a partnership to support the successful market entry and the commercialization of both drugs and medical devices, in the United States. And it's really designed to help companies, both small and emerging biopharma companies, to enter the U.S. in a successful manner. And we provide various services as listed here, including regulatory consultation. We have an on-demand panel of experts to support you. We've also established a clinical site network that companies from Israel can tap into, that consists of over 700 academic centers of excellence in the United States for the conduct of clinical trials. And then we're also hosting free webinars such as this program on a monthly basis. And we're also going to be expanding the webinars to include various investor forums in conjunction with the annual JP Morgan Healthcare Conference every year. And then finally, through our Innosphere partner, we've established a place to call home where we can provide integrated services to help you get established in the United States. Next slide. CSSi Lifesciences has been in business for over 15 years. We're based in Baltimore in close proximity to the FDA, with offices in London as well as Hyderabad, India. We're an innovative CRO and consulting group that provides customized solutions to help companies accelerate their drug or medical device from discovery to commercialization, while mitigating risk, cost, and time, while increasing your success. Some of our successes are illustrated here. We have extensive experience in taking over 500 and developing over 500 drugs, and we've taken over 85 drugs successfully through the FDA. We're able to provide services to small and emerging companies on an on-demand basis. So you only we're able to provide only those services what you need when you needed them. And then working with companies such as Dillon, we've assisted our clients in raising over $700 million dollars over the past 4 years. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ben Walker from Innosphere Ventures.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Ben. I'm also located in Colorado. We do have offices in Fort Collins with office and lab space, offices in Boulder, Denver, and South Denver. We have been in business for 22 years. We help clients through the commercialization efforts. We help clients get investor ready and have a network of investors that we can introduce you to. We do have a small seed fund in Colorado, and we would love to hear from any of you that are interested in joining our cohort. We have a new cohort that's going to be starting the end of September. Quickest way to get in touch with us is the Innosphere website and fill out a small application. That's all I have.
Excellent. Well, yeah, we can jump right into Joe's presentation, and as he's going along, feel free to type any questions into the chat box. Also, feel free, to type in if you want to ask a verbal question. I've got the ability to unmute and let you into the conversation here, but no pressure to do so during. We'll also leave some time at the end for open questions. And yeah, I'll let Joe take it away.
Thanks, Zan. If you don't mind, Jen, if any questions that do come through the chat box, if you could just repeat them for everyone, I'd appreciate it. And welcome all. And for you, those of you who don't know who Yogi Berra is, he is quite an interesting, I'll call it philosopher, who was the catcher for the championship New York Yankee teams in the 1950s. But he does have a very particular way of expressing the truth, which is the future isn't what it used to be, although he used to say ain't. In my opinion, with where we are going now, it's better from an early stage financing standpoint. Why? You now have more options. You have family offices, high net worth individuals interested in early stage financing, in addition to the VCs and the more traditional funds and opportunities. And because you have MDs and PhDs who are now on, if you will, the funding side, there's a greater openness to new solutions, new ways of looking at things. In conjunction with that, the FDA and their equivalent throughout the world have become more flexible in approvals as they seek to find ways to accelerate solutions, not only to situations like COVID, but more broadly, particularly in those niche disease areas where there is a need for orphan drug solutions. And finally, you now have much better insight into the fundamentals of, I'll call it the physical elements, the computer that is our biosystems. I used to do these presentations for hospital execs a while ago, and I used to say, look, all we ever do is kill it, burn it, or cut it off. And it's not quite that way anymore. We literally do have solutions to issues. The last point is the delays and distractions that were created by COVID back in February, March, April, May are now abating to a great degree, and I'll address that in a little bit. So in light of this, how do you obtain early stage financing? Well, it's not easy. early stage financing usually occurs at the preclinical level, and that's a tough place to be. This is where investors see as many as 20 to 30 ideas a week, and there's a yearly cycle that operates without regard to your cycle, or if you will, the calendar. And most of that is driven by the JP Morgan conference, where everyone is preparing during the fall who they want to see at the conference. They'll then see as many as 30, 40, 50 different companies there, sort through that, come up with a selection of who they want to do greater due diligence on, spend the spring and the summer looking at that, decide if they want to finance, and then you go through the cycle all over again. So you have to be cognizant of that as you're looking at, how you want to finance and what you want to do. Now, in addition to that, there is very little interest by investors in funding what I'll call ideas. That is anything that has not been demonstrated in at least some type of animal model. So it's with difficulty to get financing if you're not logical. So what's the logic? Well, you have to provide what investors require. What do they want? They want their risk to be mitigated, and there's two types of risk: science risk and commercial risk. So on the science risk, you're looking at, has the science been verified in vivo at some level? And then the question becomes, the closer you are to humans, right, and if you can demonstrate proof in humans, the less risk it is for an investor. So we have, one of my partners was the CFO of Novartis, and he likes to talk about the triangle, which is, okay, you've proven a particular solution in the murine model, rats and mice. About 20% of what, in general, and I'll clarify that later on, of what's proven in rats and mice translates into proof in non-human primates, monkeys. And then what winds up being proven in monkeys tends to be overexpressed in humans. So from a science standpoint, you're looking at how do you demonstrate to an investor that what your compound is, or solution is, or device is, will work in humans. The second aspect of what investors are looking for in the risk mitigation area is funding. They want to see funding tied to meeting science milestones across the spectrum of what I talked about, as well as you get further on with regard to the clinical trials or whatever. I have 4 key words that I like to look at when I describe this. You need to demonstrate a clear vision of how the science can be used. It's great if you have good science, but can it actually be applied in humans? You need a strategy for science verification and liquidation events for the investor as well as for yourself. What's your strategy for your company? The management team needs to be disciplined and adhere to whatever budgets have been created and demonstrate that to an investor. And finally, and although this isn't highlighted, you have knowledge of what the competition will be. That ties into the commercially competitive science. It's not only who are you addressing now, but what's in the pipeline when your compound or device, or I'll call it idea, comes to market. The way I like to put it is, whose oxen will you gore? Whose revenue stream are you going to affect where they're going to push back rather hard? So what do investors require in this early stage financing logic? As I mentioned, verifiable science. The simple question is Can someone else validate what you proposed? Even better, has someone else independently validated what you propose? Your vision, how easily can it be delivered in humans? We have had situations where the delivery method required literally drilling a hole into someone's skull to be able to directly inject in the brain. Doesn't work quite as well as an oral or an IV insofar as acceptance not only by clinicians but by patients. Proof in humans. How close has this been tested? We have some situations where we've demonstrated via compassionate use outside the US that certain oncological approaches actually work. And then you are translating that into an FDA-approved trial. Strategy. How will you validate, with de minimis confounders and outliers? Meaning, have you thought through the way you're going to run through your trials to improve the probability of success? What's your gating criteria? Have you thought through what the risks are, what the unknowns are? My favorite expression is you don't know what you don't know, but what you do need to do is to limit that phrase to the greatest extent possible. Are your milestones and liquidation points well thought out and consistent with the person that you're asking to put funds up? What's their goals? What are their risk appetite? It's important. What's their need from a liquidation standpoint, their time frame? And as I mentioned before, discipline. Can the team avoid deviations from the budget and the verification plan? All of this demonstrates not only that the science works, but that the management team understands the investor's need. And then finally, you've got the commercially competitive science. Will the results of your effort be usable, desired? Do people want to use it? And will it be practical versus what's then going to be available? And I can't emphasize the last point enough. Whose revenue streams will you gore? And if it's a very large organization, and the pushback's strong, what's your strategy for dealing with that? Have you thought that through? All right, so let's switch to, I'll call it the more practical aspects of what we're talking about. Investor types. We have private equity, which tends to be large funds. We're seeing a lot more liquidity here. A lot of groups have been raising funds over the last couple of years, particularly. You now have family offices of high net worth individuals. Usually, they will have a gatekeeper who is medically qualified to be able to truly evaluate what your hypothesis is and how it's been validated, so you can expect them to go through what your strategy is and what your vision is. The VC world, which most of you should be familiar with, and the fact that they take a great portion of equity and return in exchange for helping you. And then the strategic partners, the large biotech, pharma, device companies that will be looking for you as their R&D shops to basically meet a particular need. The one thing we're seeing here is a refocus on particular verticals where a lot of these players would have a much broader view a year and a half ago, and now they've tightened their view to certain areas: central nervous system, oncology, certain types of orphan drug diseases, anti-inflammatory, which is now coming back up again. So all of those will have different risk appetites, different interest levels, and different needs. But they all will go through a review process. The due diligence aspect can take a significant amount of time. The process usually winds up being, once you send out a presentation and they decide that they want to do a deeper dive, you now have to be able to demonstrate factually and in detail, not only your science with how your, I'll call it particular compound, how it works, mechanism of action, freedom to operate, the patents, everything else, but then also commercially. And by there, I mean, what's your budget, what's your time frame, how realistic and reasonable is all that, with all of that data being in your data room. And then time to final agreement. We usually tell everyone, once we start going out to investors, it takes 6 to 9 months on average to actually get to documentation. And then it depends upon how long the lawyers take. Funding amounts, you have range, timing, and control. How much control are you willing to give up? What's the timing in your need? How do you work that out? And what's the realistic range of your need versus what your desires are? And I'm going to that's very particular to each individual situation and each individual investor. So to talk about that in more detail than broadly doesn't make sense. But generally, it's about a $5 million fund from, I'll call it in vitro, in vivo, murine model to, with CGMP processing to FDA application. And then generally it takes another 20 to 30 million to get your phase 2A, 2B through that with top line information. Phase 3, it depends upon what you're doing, and the range can be anywhere between 60 and $200 or $300 million, depending upon what you're looking at and the population you're seeking to address. That also affects your timing. That also affects how much control you have, because as you get into phase 2s and 3s, you're probably going to want to work with a strategic partner who will affect your trial as well as affect your distribution network. The valuation conundrum, very simple. How do you evaluate something that may have been proven in rats and mice, in monkeys, maybe even in humans? However, you don't know what your true time frame is going to be for uptake, as well as what your competition will be and price points will be, as those variables that you can't control affect your returns. It also drives the return from an investor. So from a banker's standpoint, the issue becomes, how do I look at your idea and put it in comparison? There's a lot of different ways. Net present values, percentage of future revenue streams, what the competition is. But all of that truly changes and is very, I'll call it liquid and flexible. So you have to be willing to work with your bankers in the way it works, which gets me to what's the right match and fit. I'll mention this a little bit later, but we've been talking about this at Dillon over the last couple weeks. And what Dillon tries to do is bring to this portion of the market the same services, attitude, and approach that you would see from a larger firm, the JP Morgans, the Goldman Sachs, the Morgan Stanleys of the world. What does that mean? It means that we act like principals and we give advice not only from a financial standpoint, but from a business standpoint. My background is similar, is part of that. I've been the CEO of a device company, the CFO of a couple of banks, different situations, and all of us have that attitude and approach. You need to find someone that fits what you're looking for. Are you just looking for a transaction person? Are you looking for someone who's going to give you more than that? And that will help you drive the validation issues. That will help you drive from where you are to where you want to be. Final point on bankers. All of us conduct due diligence, some at greater levels than others, some with more detail and refinement than others, but all will do due diligence on you, on your background, on your team, on the science. They will talk to KOLs, find out what other people think about what you're doing and who you are. Fees, generally, you're looking at a range of anywhere between 5 and 20% cash fees. Warrants, generally, it depends upon who the bankers are, and those warrants can range anywhere from 5 to 12% usually. Some costs, and there are other issues, insofar as the difficulty of getting an approval through the FDA in the US or other similar approval authorities, as Jim has well said.
Joe,
I want to switch.
Question in my here. It's actually from the previous slide when you're first presenting around kind of is really the chicken and egg question of, can you prove the validation in order to get the funding, or do you need the funding in order to actually get the validation? So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that. Maybe the answer lies in your last point about investor types, right? Is there another type of investor you should be going to? But what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, a lot of people call preclinical the valley of death, all right, because of that particular conundrum. It's difficult to get funding to prove your hypothesis or your thesis. And at the same time, you need the funding to prove your hypothesis and thesis. To answer the question, there are many companies similar to Ben's Innosphere that will do early seed. So you've demonstrated, let's call it, using grants and other methods, family and friends, in rats and mice, that your thesis, your compound, your device works. And there are seed groups that you can go to that will help you move forward. Some of them are very focused. Some of them are focused on minority groups, on women. Some of them are focused in particular areas. You have some of the societies like for ALS or for American Cancer Society that will help fund to a certain degree. Family offices, high net worth individuals, particularly if they have family and friends, will look at something and be willing to put up some level of funds. It's a difficult area, and it's difficult to answer, quite frankly. If I had to break down the best approach, right, it would be family, friends, and grants to get you to a proof in mice and rats, or the murine model, or whatever the equivalent is for what you're doing. And then to have an approach with family offices, high net worth, and some of the private equity shops. I wouldn't go to a VC, where you can then get to a CGMP process. The CGMP, meaning manufacturing under FDA approved guidelines, then depends upon what you're doing. You probably can develop enough of your compound in a lab to keep your costs down to then go to the FDA with an application or the equivalent, obviously, for a 1A trial. So to answer that question, that would be the sequence, and that is the way I kind of laid that out in that one slide. And I'll go back to that here. There we go. So you're looking at family offices, high net worth and private equity, once you've demonstrated in 1A, hey, it's not toxic in humans, then you wind up opening up not only the broader network of private equity family offices, but the VCs and the strategic partners. That answer your question?
Perfect. Yeah, I think that was, yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
All right. I want to put all of this in the context of the broader markets. Usually I don't do this, but I did a presentation back in early April, and these were the statistics in early April, and you can see the impact of COVID on the Dow, the S&P, and the Russell 2000. Year to date, you know, as April, February, and March really got slammed by concern and by the economic downturn, not only domestically but globally. And it put an end to the bull market, all right? The comment about index funds and ETFs is, if you're not familiar, what happens is that the index funds basically, even if they are not associated with the particular area that you are, will have a tendency to bring down the broader indices, and it basically rotates and pull the entire market down in a downward spiral. You can read what I have here. But as Yogi has said, it ain't over till it's over. So when you look at the situation as of the beginning of August, you can see year to date how much improved the Dow, the S&P, and the Russell were. And you can also see in the month of July how it continued to change the vectoring of the markets. The question is this a new bull market, you know, or would it get turned down? And again, you can read what I have here. But I did update the statistics as of Friday, August 14th. And there is continuing improvement. So where the Dow was down 4.9%, now it's only down 2.1%. And that's in a span of 10 calendar days. So effectively 2 business weeks. The S&P is now up 4.4%. And the Russell is actually down 9.4%. because the issues with tech, and I'll be willing to say that, you know, after looking at Tesla today and the fact that it's up even more, that's going to change over time. So what you're seeing is a change in attitude. But again, as Yogi says, it ain't over till it's over. We haven't seen all of the second quarter reporting yet, and you're getting into a period where traders are more dominant, even greater than they have been before from an investor standpoint. So what does that mean if you are looking to get funding, not from a market standpoint, but from those groups that I talked about? Well, with the Dow and the S&P and the Russell, I'll call it, having dropped, unless you're doing real high tech, right? You'll probably see lower valuations than you would have before. What does that mean? They're going to want a bigger piece of equity than they would have, say, 2 years ago or a year. The negotiations will be more difficult because the investors will see an opportunity to basically squeeze you harder. They are going to spend more time on due diligence because they're going to want to reduce their risk factors even more because of their opportunities in the commercial markets, as well as the increased number of early stage opportunities that they have. Now, having said that, there is a lot more cash available, and that creates a much larger universe of available investors because of the increased interest, particularly in biotech and healthcare. One of the crossovers here that I really should mention is, I'll call it artificial intelligence and machine learning for healthcare. That has really stepped up insofar as from an interest standpoint from investors. The other area that has now become far more interesting is the anti-infective world and anti-inflammatory, which 2 years ago was or even a year ago, very difficult to get funded. So you're seeing a big change in interest and attitude from an investor standpoint, and the crossover, because the valuations in healthcare for AI versus high tech are very, very different, as I'm sure you're aware. Touch on COVID. My opinion is that as we have progressed toward vaccines and whatever, the distractions are abating, but they still exist. There are 135 different companies or efforts to come up with a vaccine and a treatment for COVID that have been funded. There are others that are working on it and have not been funded. That does distract, right, investors to do diligence there and possibly away from you and whatever it is that you're focused on. I actually have one company that is being reviewed right now, and I'm surprised at how it's distracted that high net worth group from a different situation that they were also reviewing. Investors are also refocusing on where to invest. And I keep on coming back to this, how close to humans. The more you can prove that it's non-toxic and safe in humans, the better you are. It is a really significant risk mitigating factor. Now, depending upon what you're working on and depending upon what they're looking at from a COVID situation, it can divert their focus away from you to something else if you are only in rats and mice. Illiquidity caused by market volatility. What the market's doing is forcing some investors to reevaluate the changes in valuation because of the change in market valuation. So where they may have invested 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago in a private equity situation, now because of the changes in valuation, their returns are different, and that creates a more illiquid situation for them as they try to exit, which affects valuations on everything else they're looking at, which also affects how they might see you. And again, I come back to risk avoidance. The more you can demonstrate that you're going to work with them to reduce their risk level, the smarter it is, the easier it is for them to give you mind share. Let me put it this way. Put yourself in their situation, right? They're sitting on X millions of dollars, which is either their own money, family money, or other investors who have given it to them. Step out of yourself for a moment, put yourself there, and now a proposal has been given to you where you don't have that great a depth of knowledge. You're seeing it cold. The question becomes, how much risk are you willing to take based upon what you see? And what questions will you have based upon what you see? The better that presentation is in demonstrating for them the level of risk, the risk avoidance, the validation and verification the easier it is for them to say, I really want to dig into this and do a deep dive. It's important for you to look at that and then also put all of that in the perspective of, will they move away from my area toward COVID because they see that with greater commercial potential. Final point, personal issues. Investors have personal issues. You know, my mom, dad, brother, sister, family member had cancer of ABC type. They may be very focused on those issues and therefore be more willing to fund. They also may have issues with regard to management teams. What's your experience? Have you commercialized something before? Or are you just an academic PhD who does not understand the difference between grant funding and commercial funding? They're really issues you have to consider and put in the context of the gorilla, the 800-pound gorilla that's sitting there right now, which is COVID. All right, just to basically talk a little bit about Dillon. We were founded in 2004. We have 12 partners, 8 of them very active, the other 4 who are involved in companies at a level where they are not able to be active in the investment banking world. As I mentioned, the way we like to define ourselves is we think and act like principals and provide financial and business advice. And in our opinion, that differentiates us from others, and particularly in the segment that we focus on, which is basically raising funds up to roughly $50 million. Have we done more than that? Yeah, we have. A lot of experience, as you can see on our website. Our key managing directors who are active, and the person sitting here with me, Chris Pilder, who is our new head of capital markets, should be on this list and isn't. And I apologize, Chris, for not including you. Mike McCarty has been the CEO of a number of different companies. Believe it or not, he is a nuclear physicist by training. George Bickerstaff was the CFO of Novartis. Myself, as you can see, I've done a number of different things. I actually, in a parallel career, am a retired colonel in the U.S. Air Force. Jeff Schwartz, Goldman Sachs, PhD in neuroscience. Julia Gregory has raised over $1 billion, the CEO of 2 sector companies. And we also do restructurings and bankruptcies. So and we talk to each other. We look at things as a team to focus on how we can help you as an individual. That comes back to the point I raised before. It affects how we value companies. It also is important insofar as a matching standpoint. How do you match yourself to a banker or to a financial business advisor? Do you just want someone who's going to get you the money and execute a transaction? Do you want more than that? And it's a very essential question you have to ask yourself. So with that, this is our contact information. Be happy to answer questions as appropriate. And Zan, if there are any questions that you have, be happy to answer them at this point.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. It's very comprehensive and in-depth. It was, for the time that we have for just an overview, it's some really great points in there. I think, yeah, one question already that I guess we touched on before, but that I got some follow-up questions on is just more interest in this stage, which seems super critical for startups when they don't feel like they have the funding to get the true level of evidence, right, they need for the big money. Do you have any other advice about even examples, primary examples of funding sources if this startup is early but doesn't have connections to high net worth individuals or have connections to a family office? where can they go to find some more examples of folks right below this, the higher evidence tier?
There are a number of accelerators, right, that will help, you know, companies of this type. Jim can actually answer that as well as I can. You have, like in New York, there's a group called Golden Seeds, which are actually women who are from the financial services industry that particularly focus on healthcare as well as on women and minority-led firms. There is a bio seed funder in New York. There are similar firms in Cleveland, in the Boston area, in San Francisco. And Jim, I think you can probably note more. And then there's Ben, who actually, you know, does the same thing in Colorado. So if you kind of Google biotech accelerators, it will give you a pretty good list of people who will do small amounts of money. Let me, you know, a lot of academics who have an idea and, you know, are now bringing it, they want to commercialize it, will also do an SBIR fund, which also works. It takes a long time and it's a lot of paperwork, right? There are also grants that people will get from the NIH and other areas. I have one client that has a neuropathic pain product that has 2 separate grants from the NIH. The issue, though, that will get you to a certain point. You have 2 problems when you rely too heavily on grants. One is investors will look at you and say, well, are you just trying to be an academic research group? And 2, they don't value those grants from a valuation standpoint the same way as external funding. So my answer, I would look at some of the accelerator groups. I would look at some of the seed groups. I would actually work the family office networks. There are 2 in the United States that are fairly strong. One that's located out of Florida, the other one that's located up here in Connecticut. So those are ways to get some of that funding. The best approach there is to break down your need and do little bites. So $500,000, $1 million, all right, to get you to the next point of demonstration. You can use a convert, which we find works rather well, until you get to a point where now you're closer to that in-human validation point. Does that answer your question? Jim?
Sounds great, yeah.
I think I have nothing further to add other than, you know, we work with over 20 different US academic and non-academic accelerators. And a number of these accelerator programs, such as the Innosphere, have funds available to support companies that want to relocate, say, to Colorado, and will provide various mechanisms of support and financial capital to advance their technologies. In addition, the other source of revenue are some of the major pharma companies all have their own venture funds, including medical device companies. These are typically run separate from the organization, and they have a variety of investment theses, but the money from these groups are typically easier to acquire than through other routes.
Very nice. Yeah, very helpful with that. Yeah, Ben, let us know if you want to add anything else as well on the Innosphere point.
So also in Colorado, there's a grant program called the Advanced Industries Fund that funds once a year in the fall, which is another opportunity.
Excellent. Very cool. All right. Yeah. And I think one other, sorry, is there another comment there?
Yeah, there are some of the states also will do a matching fund if you're located in that state. Like Delaware does that, New York State does that, I believe California does that. The criteria vary state to state, but it's also something else to do. Now, usually what they'll do, you have to be reasonably advanced, again, at least in vivo. And many times what they'll do is they'll take debt and then some equity position and or some kind of convert so that they get a broader equity position. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. It just takes a lot of work.
Yeah, definitely seems. Well, that's a good, maybe a segue into thoughts on location, or even let's just say specifically for international companies coming in, right? Who may be unlike domestic companies who by the time they've gotten to a certain point, they've obviously got their basic kind of legal structure set up. If you're coming in internationally and you have some choice still on where you set up legally, are there certain basic requirements you got to meet for U.S. VCs, let's say, or I guess you brought up some nice like state-based options you can maybe decide based on some incentives. Yeah, any advice for international companies locating here?
Delaware is the location, all right, for legal entities in the United States, as I'll call it, the state of choice from an incorporation standpoint. Most of the companies that we see at this stage are limited liability companies. They're not C Corps or S Corps. And once you get to a certain point, if you're international, there are the special purpose vehicles that can be constructed in the Cayman Islands and other locations that create, better tax situations for international investors versus domestic United States investors. And it's all legal and you're not violating any rules, and it works rather well actually for large pharma. What I would avoid is you'll get a pitch by a lot of individuals to do a SPAC or to do a reverse into a shell. That's, in my opinion, not a smart move. You don't want to be a pink sheet company, with, I'll call it, trading by appointment. It's not looked on favorably. Now, having said that, if you can reverse into a company that has a lot of cash and can fund you, that works well, or as I guess you would say, muzzle tough, right? It is a really, really excellent approach if it has a management team, cash, and other opportunities for you and for them. Jim, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think, we see companies, come into the U.S. I think the one recommendation that we always make, and one of the genesis behind the U.S.-Israel accelerator program was really based on by having a residency in the United States as a small business entity, you are granted a number of benefits from the FDA, as well as from the SBIR office. So if you're thinking about relocating to the US, our office in Maryland serves as the legal address for a number of companies, including 2 Israeli-based companies that are registered as small businesses. But you are entitled to a number of advantages with the FDA, as well as cost deferments. Your first 510K is free. And your drug application costs are significantly reduced.
Wow. Well, that's an excellent addition. Definitely something to consider. And yeah, I think that folks on the call, I guess you see Joe's contact info here, but yeah, for the others, anybody on the call, feel free to shoot me an email for an introduction to the speakers on the call. We can always get that communication going because these are really great offers. I think maybe one other, just thinking about the process of giving some of your company away. I know, Joe, do you have any, or others, any thoughts on how you decide what's worth it? What do you sell your soul, 80% of your company for a little quick money, or not? Is it an art? Is it a science? And how do you find out how much to give away?
Yeah, there is actually. I think one of the primary questions that you have to face is, do you want to actually create a new independent company? Or is your intent to basically sell to a strategic partner or to basically merge into someone else? That really is a driver. And because that's the point you're going to drive your company to, not only from a science and a commercial standpoint, but from an intellectual and psychological standpoint. Now, the so depending upon what you're doing, right, will then drive how you fund yourself through that process. Because if you say, well, I want to basically take my compound and deliver it myself, I want my own company and grow a company. Well, you have to look at post-FDA approval. You have to look at the commercialization, the ramp-up time, the need for funding working capital. And when you consider all of that, there is a significant investment to be made. That will affect what your residual is, because the more the cash that's needed, the more you're going to give up, the smaller your, I'll call it, takeaway is from this whole process, even if you use a royalty approach or whatever. So what I'm getting at is the following. There is a decision point where you actually calculate, if I raise X amount of dollars, and usually it's millions of dollars, how much is a VC or a strategic partner going to want of my company? What's my residual? What's the time frame from now, if I sell now to them, versus go through the process I described? And that is, we actually have a new client who has just gone through that process and said, it's not worth it. We'd rather sell our company and merge it into someone else now, rather than raise, in this instance, $30 million to take it to the next level, because what we're going to give up does not justify the effort, the time, and the net present value. So the process here is, as you go through each step, right, in the preclinical world, the 1A, has it been proven in humans, to be safe and non-toxic? The 2A, 2B world, where, okay, now we've demonstrated it actually is effective in humans. Each one of those, you have to step back and say, how much more money do I need to get to the next level? Who is going to give me that money, and how much are they going to want? And you do that literally as a math calculation, based upon what else is available at that time. I know I haven't given you a specific answer, because what I tell you today, I guarantee will not be accurate 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, or a year from now, because all the variables will change. The market's going to change. We don't know who's going to get elected president in November. We don't know how COVID will affect the reallocation of resources. All of that will affect every one of those points as you go through the process. So it's rather amorphous, but it's the process you go through frequently in order to evaluate, is it worth what my taking the next step?
Yeah. Wow, really helpful. Yeah, and thank you for the responses, for the presentation. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, yeah, any last comments from folks? I think we're wrapping it up.
Just if additional comments and questions, I've been monitoring the chat room. If you want to reach us, we do have a helpline. You can reach out to us through Zan, or you can reach out to us through the helpline, and we'll make sure that your questions get directed to the right person who can provide you the support and the assistance that you need, and get your questions answered right away. So thank you.
Excellent. Yes, thank you all. All right. Well, yes, thanks everybody on the line as well for joining. And yeah, be on the lookout for communication on the next webinar in the series.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.